The first rule of survival is to never look back. But I couldn't tear my eyes away from the blood on my hands. His blood. It wasn't regret that held me frozen, but the terrifying calm that settled in my soul. From the shadows across the alley, a pair of golden eyes watched me, unblinking, as if to say, "Now you are mine." Chapter 1. The Traitor's Daughter. The air in the saloon was thick enough to drink, a soupy mix of stale beer, sawdust, and whispered judgments. She felt the weight of every pair of eyes on her back, a familiar pressure like a physical hand holding her down. They called her the Traitor's Daughter. Not to her face. Of course not. They preferred their poison served in low murmurs that coiled around the legs of the sticky tables, because cowards always hide their fangs. She moved with a practiced grace, her tray balanced perfectly, a ghost weaving through the living. Her smile was a mask she put on with her apron, a shield that never quite covered the exhaustion in her own eyes. Surviving was the goal. Every single day was a battle she fought with a tight jaw and a steady hand. A rough hand snagged her wrist, a miner with more gold on his fingers than sense in his head. Another round, sweet thing, and maybe a smile that reaches your eyes this time? Clara pulled her arm free, the motion smooth and leaving no room for argument. "Beer is all I'm serving, Hank." Her voice was low, even, not hostile, just tired. Fighting wasn't worth the energy. She had to save all her strength, every last drop of it, for her sister. Following that thought, a small cough from the corner booth drew her attention. Lila sat there, a book open in her lap, her small frame swallowed by the worn leather. Her face was pale, a delicate porcelain doll in a room full of splintered wood and broken men. That little sound, that tiny, fragile noise, was a hook in Clara's heart, pulling her away from the grime and the leers. She set 2 glasses of water on the table, ignoring Hank's grumbling. "You okay, little wolf?" Clara whispered, her fingers brushing a strand of dark hair from Lila's forehead. Lila nodded but didn't look up from her page. "Just a tickle. Are they almost here?" Her question was a hopeful little bird taking flight in the smoky room. "Almost," Clara promised, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. Their ride was an old, rattling truck that coughed more than it ran, and it was 2 towns over for a parts delivery. They were stuck here for at least another hour. This place, it wasn't good for Lila. The tension in the air was a poison, and her sister was far too sensitive to it. Why did she feel it so much more? Was it just her youth, or something deeper? Something buried in their cursed bloodline? That question was a constant buzzing fly she could never quite swat away. As if summoned by her dark thoughts, the front doors swung open with a bang that silenced the room. 3 men filled the doorway, blocking the last of the evening light. They were big, dressed in leather vests that strained across their shoulders, and they moved with the lazy confidence of apex predators. The patches on their backs showed a snarling wolf's head circled by thorns. Outlaws, rogues. The kind of shifters who fed on chaos because they had no pack, no honor, no code. Their arrival was a stone dropped into the still, murky pond of the saloon. The whispers died. The laughter choked. Clara felt a cold dread trickle down her spine, a feeling she knew all too well. It was the feeling of being hunted. One of them, the leader with a jagged scar bisecting his eyebrow, scanned the room. His gaze passed over the miners, the ranchers, the drunks, and then it landed on Clara. It stuck to her. His eyes, a chilling, pale blue, didn't just look at her. They seemed to see through her, searching for the part of her she kept hidden, the part that whimpered in fear. He nudged his companion, a brute of a man with a shaved head, and nodded subtly in her direction. They didn't approach. They didn't speak. They just took a table in the darkest corner, their presence a suffocating weight. But they watched her. Every move she made, every glass she filled, every forced smile she gave. The world shrank to the space between their table and hers, a tightrope of pure menace. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. She had to get Lila out of there. Now. This was more than just trouble. This was a reckoning, and it was walking right toward her. Chapter 2. The Scent on the Wind. The sheriff's office in Jasper Creek was a cage built of silence. Elias liked it that way. Silence couldn't lie. It couldn't whisper rumors or pass judgment. Inside these four walls, he was just Sheriff Jones, a man who dealt with lost cattle and the occasional Saturday night brawl. He could pretend the beast inside him was sleeping, instead of pacing endlessly, restlessly behind the bars of his ribs. His life was a carefully constructed fortress of order and control, built brick by brick to keep his own past buried deep in the ground, because some things, once unleashed, could never be caged again. This afternoon, the quiet was broken by the crackle of the radio. "Sheriff? You there?" It was Martha, from the diner. "Earl is trying to pay for his pie with a pocket full of buttons again. Says they're collector's items." Elias leaned into the mic, his voice a low rumble. "Tell him I'll trade him 2 jail cells for the whole collection, Martha." A long pause. "I'm on my way." He hung up, the simple problem a welcome distraction. Buttons he could handle. It was the other things, the things that crept in at night, that he couldn't. He stepped outside, the afternoon sun hitting him with a dry heat that smelled of dust and distant pines. The town of Jasper Creek was a single dusty street, a collection of tired buildings leaning against each other for support. The people here looked at him with a strange mix of respect for the badge and a deep, instinctual wariness for the man wearing it. They knew he was different. They could feel it. They remembered the rumors, the whispers of a dead mate, of a past he never spoke of a darkness he kept leashed tight. He let them whisper. Their fear was another wall in his fortress. Just as he started toward the diner, a breath of wind shifted, carrying with it a scent that stopped him dead in his tracks. Wildflowers, rain-soaked earth, and something else. Something impossibly familiar, like a half-forgotten song from a life he'd never lived. It was a scent that spoke directly to the wolf inside him, a creature he starved and ignored and fought every single day. The beast stirred. It raised its head from a long slumber, sniffing the air, every muscle in its powerful body suddenly awake. His eyes scanned the street, searching for the source. And then he saw her. Across the way, leaving the saloon. The woman from the bar, the one they called the traitor's daughter. Her dark hair was pulled back, but a few strands had escaped to frame a face that was all sharp angles and stubborn pride. She was holding a smaller girl's hand, her movements fiercely protective. He had seen her before, of course, 100 times. But he had never seen her. Not like this. It wasn't a thought. It was a physical jolt, a lightning strike to his very soul. The world narrowed to a single point, her. The air crackled. The scent was a fire in his lungs. His wolf let out a silent howl of recognition, a primal cry that echoed in the empty spaces of his heart. Mine. The word was not his own. It was a possessive, absolute claim that rose from a place deeper than thought, a place of pure instinct. He flinched, shoving the feeling down with brutal force. No, not again. He had walked that path before, and it had led to ruin, to fire, to a grave he could never visit. He had a duty to this town, a duty to maintain order, a duty to keep his monster locked away. Love and mates. Those were luxuries for other men, for men whose souls weren't stained with blood. He was the sheriff, the protector, the lonely guardian on the wall. He had to be, because the alternative was unthinkable. He turned his back on her, his fists clenched, and walked toward the diner. But he could still feel her presence, a warmth on his skin, a pull he knew would not be so easily denied. Chapter 3. The Growl in the Storm. The last customer finally stumbled out into the night, leaving behind a blessed quiet, broken only by the clinking of glasses. Relief was a cool drink of water after a day in the desert, but it was short-lived. Outside, the sky was turning a bruised purple, the clouds gathering like an angry mob. A storm was coming. Clara worked quickly, her movements efficient as she wiped down the last of the tables. Every scrape of a chair, every gust of wind rattling the window pane sounded like a footstep behind her. The image of the outlaws, their cold eyes, their predatory stillness, was burned into her mind. "Hurry, Lila," she urged, her voice tight. "Let's get home." They slipped out the back door, into an alley that smelled of wet dirt and garbage. The first drops of rain began to fall. Fat. Cold. They ran, their footsteps splashing in the growing puddles. The truck was parked 2 blocks away, 2 blocks that suddenly felt like 100 miles. The wind picked up, whipping Clara's hair across her face and tearing at their clothes. They were halfway down the alley when 2 figures stepped out of the shadows, blocking their path. It was them, the leader with the scar and his hulking friend. "In a hurry, little thing?" the leader purred, his voice a low scrape of gravel. His smile was a slash in the near darkness, all teeth. Clara's heart leaped into her throat. She pushed Lila behind her, her body a shield. "Leave us alone." "Now, why would we do that?" the big one chuckled, cracking his knuckles. "We just want to talk. About your father. We hear he left something valuable behind." Panic, cold and sharp. It stole her breath. What did they know? What could they possibly want? Her father had left them nothing but a legacy of shame and a lifetime of looking over their shoulders. Before she could answer, the leader lunged. He was fast, unnaturally so. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in like talons. Lila screamed. Clara reacted on pure instinct. She kicked, she fought, she twisted, but it was like fighting a mountain of rock. They dragged her into the mud, the rain coming down in sheets now, cold and blinding. Fear was a wild animal clawing at her insides. For Lila, not for herself, for her sister. And then, a new sound cut through the storm. A growl. It was deep, guttural. Not animal, not human, but something terrifyingly in between. A sound that promised violence on a scale that made the bikers seem like children. A shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness of the alley's mouth. It moved with a liquid deadliness, a controlled fury that made the air itself seem to vibrate. It was the sheriff. Elias didn't say a word. His eyes were fixed on the hand gripping Clara's arm, and in the gloom they seemed to glow with a faint, golden light. The change was horrifying. The calm, contained lawman was gone. In his place stood something primal, ancient. A predator. The leader scoffed. "Well, look what we have here. The town dog, come to play." Elias took another step. The fight was brutally short. It wasn't a brawl. It was a dismantling. A blur of motion, the crack of bone, a choked cry of pain. He moved with a speed and strength that defied belief, his strikes precise and devastating. In seconds, both men were on the ground, one unconscious, the other groaning and clutching a broken arm. The leader stared up at Elias, his bravado shattered, replaced by sheer terror. Elias loomed over him, the rain plastering his dark hair to his skull. "She's not for you," he snarled, the sound ripping from his chest. "Get out of my town. And if you ever look at her again, I will tear you apart." He let the threat hang in the air, heavy and absolute. The outlaw scrambled to his feet, dragging his friend with him, and vanished into the night. Silence descended, broken only by the drumming rain and Clara's ragged breaths. She was trembling, covered in mud, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Elias turned to her, the golden light in his eyes slowly fading back to a haunted human gaze. He stood over her, his broad shoulders blocking out the world. She looked up at him, shaking, confused. "Why?" she whispered, the word barely audible. "Why would you save me?" He reached down, his hand surprisingly gentle as he helped her to her feet. His thumb brushed over her cheek, wiping away a streak of mud. The touch was electric, a jolt of heat that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with a terrifying, undeniable pull. He leaned in close, his voice a low growl that was meant for her alone. "Because you're mine." Chapter 4. Marked for death. The silence in his truck was a living thing. It breathed with the shiver of the girl in the passenger seat and the terrified stillness of the child in the back. Elias drove, the primal words he'd spoken in the alley, "because you're mine," echoing in the space between them. They were a brand on the air, a claim he had no right to make and no power to take back. He could feel Clara's stare on him, feel the heat of her fear, her confusion, her anger. It was better than the alternative. Her fear would keep her alive. He pulled up to the sheriff's office, the building a small island of light in the stormy darkness, and killed the engine. "Wait here," he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. The wolf inside him wanted to drag them both into the safety of the building, to stand guard over them until the sun came up. The man knew he had to go back. He had to get answers. He left one of the bikers unconscious in the mud, a message. The other one, the leader with the scarred brow, he'd disabled with a shattered kneecap. He would be right where Elias left him, stewing in his own pain and arrogance. He found him trying to crawl away, dragging his ruined leg through the filth. Elias blocked his path, a figure of absolute authority. "We're going to have a talk." The outlaw spat a mouthful of blood and rainwater. "Go to hell, law dog." A low growl rumbled in Elias's chest, a sound that bypassed the man's ears and went straight to the animal terror coiled in his gut. "Hell is what happens when you don't answer my questions." He crouched, his presence suffocating. "Who sent you? Who's the alpha?" The biker's bravado crumbled because this wasn't a cop in front of him anymore. This was something older. "I don't know his name," he stammered, his eyes wide. "They call him the Patriarch. He's building something. A new pack. From all the scattered crews." The Patriarch. The name was a whisper Elias had heard on the wind, a ghost story other rogues told to scare each other. And what does he want with her? With the traitor's daughter? "The bloodline," the man choked out. "Her father, Harris. He wasn't just a traitor. He stole something from the Patriarch's old pack years ago. Something that gives an alpha control, power over the territory itself. An old ritual. The Patriarch believes the secret to unlocking it is in Harris's blood. He wants the girl, the little one. He thinks she has the gift, untainted. The older sister, she's just in the way. Marked for death." Ice flowed through Elias's veins. It wasn't a random attack, it was a targeted hunt, a blood feud. This wasn't just about chaos. It was about power, about old-world werewolf mythology that sane shifters had abandoned long ago. This patriarch was a fanatic, and he would stop at nothing. The local jail cells were bars of steel, useless against a creature that could tear through them like paper. His own small house in town was a tinderbox. No. There was only one place. One location that was built to withstand a siege. Without another word, he turned his back on the groaning outlaw and walked away, his purpose now forged into something hard and sharp. He had thought he could keep his past and present separate. He thought he could be a simple human sheriff. What a fool he'd been. The past wasn't dead. It had just been waiting. He strode back into the office where Clara was huddled with her sister, a fierce guardian over her only family. Her chin came up defiant as he entered. He didn't waste time with explanations she wouldn't believe. He simply stated the truth. "You're both coming with me. To my ranch." He tossed a set of keys on the desk. "It's not a request." Her eyes flashed with fury. "You can't just—" "He wants Lila." Elias cut her off, his voice flat and deadly. "And he'll kill you to get to her. So you can either come with me, or I can lock you in a cell for your own protection. Either way, you're not leaving my sight." The choice was an illusion. She was a prisoner, and he was her warden. Chapter 5. The scent of his shirt. The truck ride was a blur of rain-streaked darkness and suffocating silence. Clara held Lila's small hand, her own knuckles white. Every bump in the road, every turn onto a darker, more isolated path, felt like a step deeper into a cage. The man beside her, this Sheriff Jones, was a stranger who smelled of the storm and of some wild, dangerous thing she refused to name. He had saved them, yes, but his rescue felt like a capture. His claim, "You're mine," was a chain she could feel wrapped around her throat. His ranch was miles out of town, at the end of a long gravel road that wound through dense forest. The house wasn't what she expected. It was a simple, sturdy log cabin built like a fortress. A wide porch wrapped around it, and a single light burned in the window, a lonely beacon in a sea of black. It was Spartan, clean, and profoundly empty. It was a place a man hid, not where he lived. "There are dry clothes in the bathroom," he said, his voice echoing in the stark main room. He didn't look at her. "The bedrooms are upstairs. Take your pick." With that, he was gone, retreating into the barn as if the house itself couldn't contain the restless energy pouring off him. Clara led a sleepy Lila upstairs, her heart pounding. The bathroom was spotless. Folded on a wooden stool was a set of sweatpants and a dark blue flannel shirt. His shirt. Hesitantly, she picked it up. It was soft, worn from 100 washings. It smelled of him, pine, wood smoke, leather, and that untamed, musky scent that was purely him. Putting it on felt like a surrender. The fabric swallowed her, the sleeves hanging past her hands, the hem falling to her knees. The scent was a cocoon, a dizzying, intimate invasion of her senses. A strange warmth bloomed low in her belly, a treacherous feeling that was part attraction, part terror. It was the pull of the bond, a thing she had heard whispered about in stories, a fairy tale curse she wanted no part of. She shoved the feeling down because she had to be strong for Lila. She tucked her sister into a bed that smelled of cedar and clean linen. From the window, she could see him. He was outside in the rain-soaked yard, splitting firewood with a savage intensity, the rhythmic thwack of the axe a testament to the storm raging inside him. He was a paradox, a monster who protected, a lawman who radiated violence. Who was he? Clara couldn't sleep. She sat in the dark, wrapped in his shirt, a silent sentinel. A while later, she heard the soft creak of floorboards. Lila was up. Before Clara could move, her sister had slipped down the stairs and out the front door. Panic flared. Clara followed, her heart in her mouth. She found Lila on the porch, looking at Elias, who had finally stopped his work. He stood breathing hard in the cool night air, the axe resting by his side. Lila's small voice was clear in the sudden quiet. "Are you like the bad men?" Elias went very still. "What do you mean?" His voice was softer than Clara had ever heard it. You growled," Lila said, her innocence a sharp, painful knife. "My papa did that before he left. He took my mama away. Are you going to take my sister away too?" The question hung in the air, devastating and absolute. It hit Clara with the force of a physical blow, a direct strike on her deepest, most guarded fear. It wasn't just about the outlaws anymore. It was about this man, this powerful, terrifying shifter who had claimed her, and the horrifying pattern that was beginning to repeat itself. She saw the impact on Elias, too. He flinched as if struck, the pain on his face stark and real in the dim porch light. He didn't have an answer. He couldn't give one. Chapter 6. A Mark of Blood. Lila's question was a ghost. It haunted the space between them, a cold echo of a past he could never outrun. Elias watched the little girl's wide, trusting eyes and saw another pair of eyes, another innocent life caught in the crossfire of a war she didn't understand. He had sworn after everything that he would never again be the cause of that kind of pain. Yet here he was, history repeating itself like a sick joke, because fate had a cruel sense of humor. He was a monster wearing a badge, and the child saw right through the disguise. He retreated from the porch, mumbling something about checking the perimeter, needing the space, the cold, anything to chase the ghosts away. Clara followed him out into the yard a few minutes later, her arms wrapped around herself in his oversized shirt. Her scent was a constant torment, a fire he had to fight with every breath. "What was that?" she demanded, her voice a fierce whisper. "What does she mean our father stole something? Why are they after us?" "It's complicated," he said, his back to her. "Uncomplicate it," she shot back, stepping in front of him, forcing him to look at her. Her eyes were blazing. "You drag us out to this prison in the middle of nowhere. You speak in riddles. You look at me like that. And you expect me to just trust you? I don't trust your kind. I saw what being one of you did to my father. It turned him into a monster who abandoned his family." Her words were a slap, a judgment he knew he deserved. "I am nothing like your father." "You're a wolf," she spat, the word an insult. "You're all the same, all predators." He saw it then, the wall of denial she had built around herself. She was fighting her own blood, her own nature, and projecting it all onto him. He knew he had to break through it, not for his sake, but for hers, for Lila's, because their denial was going to get them killed. "You're wrong," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "We're not all the same. And you need to understand the world you've just been dragged into." He took a step closer, invading her space. "This patriarch, he's not just some thug. He's a zealot. He believes your bloodline holds the key to an ancient power, a power he will kill for. And he won't stop. He will never stop." "How would you know what he thinks?" she challenged. The moment had come. He had to give her a piece of the truth, a piece of himself he kept locked away. "Because I know how these animals operate. I know how they think." He looked her straight in the eye, letting her see the darkness he kept hidden. "Before I wore this badge, I rode with a crew. Not as bad as them, but not much better. I know the life. I know the code. I was one of them." The confession landed like a stone, shattering the air between them. Her face went pale, her defiance crumbling into shock, then into a new, deeper horror. The man protecting her was no different from the men hunting her. It was the final straw. "No," she whispered, backing away. "No, I won't. I can't." She turned, her eyes wild with panic. "Lila, we're leaving." She was going to run. He saw it in her eyes. She would take her sister and flee into the night, straight into the jaws of the wolves that were waiting for her. He started to move to stop her. But a new scent cut through the night air. It was sharp, coppery, blood. And beneath it, the foul stench of a strange wolf. It was close, too close. His own wolf surged to the surface. A protective snarl ripped from his chest. He moved without thinking, a blur of motion, placing his body squarely between Clara and the darkness of the surrounding woods. "Get inside," he commanded, his voice a low, guttural order. "Now." Clara froze, her flight forgotten, her eyes wide with a new kind of fear. He followed her gaze. There, on the heavy wooden gatepost at the entrance to the driveway, was a mark. A handprint, smeared in fresh, glistening blood with the deep, unmistakable gouges of claws dragged through it. It was a warning, a challenge, a promise. The monster was no longer out there, somewhere in the night. It was here, at their door. Chapter 7. The Cage Inside. The first morning at the ranch dawned quiet and tense. Sunlight streamed through the large cabin window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, but it couldn't touch the cold knot of dread in Clara's stomach. The bloody handprint on the gate had been washed away by the storm, but the image was seared into her memory. The threat was no longer a vague shadow. It had a name, a scent, a tangible presence that had breached their walls. Elias made them breakfast, his movements economical and silent. He placed a plate of eggs and bacon in front of her, the simple domestic act so at odds with the caged violence she'd witnessed in him that it made her head spin. Days began to bleed into one another, each one a copy of the last. The ranch was a beautiful prison. Outside, rolling hills stretched toward a vast blue sky. Inside, every window and door felt like the bars of a cell. Clara tried to build a routine, a fragile dam of normalcy against the tide of fear. She read stories to Lila. They baked cookies in the unfamiliar kitchen. They took short, supervised walks down to the creek that bordered the property. But Elias was always there, a constant, watchful presence. He never crowded them, yet his awareness was a palpable thing, a weight on the air. She was intensely, infuriatingly conscious of him, the low rumble of his voice on the phone, the scent of pine and wildness that clung to him, the way his eyes would occasionally meet hers with an intensity that felt like a physical touch. She fought the pull. She had to, because trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, especially not for a man who admitted to being one of the very monsters she despised. At night, things grew stranger. Sleep offered little escape. She would be jolted awake by a surge of restless energy, a profound need to be outside, to run under the silver light of the moon. Her skin would feel too tight, her senses unnervingly sharp. She could hear the rustle of a mouse in the walls, smell the damp earth outside her window. She told herself it was anxiety, stress. But a deeper, more instinctual part of her knew it was something else, a stirring of something ancient in her blood, a cage being rattled from the inside. A low growl vibrated in his chest, a sound of pure possession. From the shadows of the porch, the wolf watched her. Not the man. The wolf. She was a flicker of warmth and light in the window of the house he claimed as his den. The moonlight caught in her hair, turning the dark strands to silver. His territory, his female. The instinct was so powerful, so absolute, it was a physical ache. Protect, claim, mate. The human part of him fought it, built walls of duty and pain and memory to keep it contained. But the wolf was patient. It would wait. Her scent was his, and soon she would be too. One afternoon, while Elias was out mending a fence line, Lila discovered a dusty wooden chest in the back of a closet. Inside were old, forgotten things: a worn leather jacket, a tarnished silver buckle, and a photo album. "Clara, look!" Lila called, her voice bright with curiosity. She opened the book, her small fingers tracing over a faded photograph. It was a picture of a much younger Elias. He was smiling, a genuine, unguarded expression that made him look like a different person. His arm was wrapped around a beautiful woman with fiery red hair and a laugh that seemed to reach right through the paper. "Was this your friend?" Lila asked, just as Elias walked back into the house. The question fell into a sudden, heavy silence. The warmth vanished from Elias's face, replaced by a glacial cold. Clara saw him look at the photograph, and for a fleeting second, an expression of profound, gut-wrenching pain crossed his features, before it was locked away behind a mask of stone. Clara's heart gave a painful thump. The rumors. The dead mate. "Who was she, Elias?" she asked, her voice softer than she intended. He walked over, gently closing the album and taking it from Lila's hands. His movements were stiff, controlled. "That's in the past," he said, his voice completely flat, devoid of any emotion. He tucked the album back into the chest and shut the lid, the soft click of the latch sounding as final as a closing coffin. He had slammed a door in her face, leaving her shivering in the sudden cold, wondering what horrors lay buried with the memory of that smiling, red-haired woman. Chapter 8. Under the rodeo lights. Weeks of confinement had stretched the tension in the cabin to a wire-thin breaking point. Elias could feel it. He saw it in the restless pacing of Clara, in the pale, listless face of the little girl. A cage, no matter how safe, was still a cage. The annual Jasper Creek Rodeo was tonight. It was a calculated risk, a public place, a crowd full of scents and sounds that could hide an enemy. But it was also a statement. Hiding was what prey did. He was a predator, and this was his territory. Showing his face, showing them under his protection, was a way of telling the patriarch that he was not afraid. "Get your coats," he said, his announcement dropping into the quiet cabin like a stone. "We're going out." The rodeo was a riot of life and noise, a world away from the oppressive silence of the ranch. Strings of colored lights crisscrossed overhead, casting a festive glow. The air was a thick mix of popcorn, grilled onions, and livestock. For a moment, watching Lila's eyes go wide with wonder at the sight of a calf-roping event, Elias felt a crack in the icy wall around his heart. He watched Clara, saw the tension in her shoulders ease just a little as a genuine small smile touched her lips. The sight caused a painful, possessive purr to rumble in his chest, a feeling of rightness that he immediately crushed. He bought them cotton candy, its pink fluff a stark contrast to their grim reality. He stood with them by the rails of the main arena, playing the part of a guardian, a friend, a normal man. But his senses were stretched to their limits. He sorted through 1,000 scents, listened past the roar of the crowd, his gaze sweeping the stands, the walkways, the shadows. Then he caught it. A scent that didn't belong. It was sharp, aggressive. Wolf. Not one he recognized. Not one of the bikers. Someone new. His eyes found the source, a man leaning against a food stall, pretending to watch the events, but his focus was entirely on them. On Clara. On Lila. He was dressed like a ranch hand, but he moved with a predator's coiled stillness. Elias's entire being went on high alert. The friendly guardian vanished, replaced by the alpha. He saw the man start to move, his path set to accidentally intercept them as they walked toward the exit. He was aiming for Lila. Elias moved first. He stepped forward, his body a solid wall, blocking the man's path just as he was about to brush past the little girl. The collision was gentle, but the impact was electric. "Watch where you're going," the stranger grunted, his eyes hostile. Elias didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He met the man's gaze, letting the full, untamed power of his own wolf bleed into his stare. He let the stranger feel the pressure of a dominant alpha, a silent, crushing weight. A low growl, too deep for human ears to register as anything more than a vibration, rumbled in his chest. "There's nothing for you here," Elias said, his voice quiet, conversational, but laced with the promise of swift and brutal violence. "Go home." The man's eyes widened. He smelled it, the scent of raw power, of a territorial claim he could not challenge. He saw the truth. This wasn't just a human sheriff. This was a king in his own lands. Without another word, the stranger paled, gave a jerky nod, and melted back into the throng of people, swallowed by the crowd. Clara had seen the whole thing. He could feel her staring, her heartbeat quickening. She didn't understand the nuances of the challenge, the silent battle of wills, but she had seen the effect. She had seen a man recoil from Elias as if he'd touched a live wire. It was a raw display of the very power she feared, and a dangerous thrill ignited in her eyes. As they walked back to the truck, the energy of the confrontation still crackling around them, Lila stumbled and pressed her hands to her temples. "My head hurts," she mumbled, her face pale. "It's too loud, Clara. All the smells. Everything is too much." Clara knelt, her expression full of concern, attributing it to the excitement and the noise. But Elias knew better. He looked at the girl's eyes, unnaturally bright and sensitive under the parking lot lights. Her senses were sharpening. Her blood was awakening. The clock wasn't just ticking anymore. It was about to chime. Chapter 9. The Wolf at the Door. The drive back to the ranch was charged with a new, unspoken tension. Clara sat in the passenger seat, staring out at the dark ribbon of road unfurling before them. She kept replaying the scene at the rodeo in her mind, the quiet, lethal intensity in Elias's eyes, the way the other man had practically fled from him. It was terrifying. It was a glimpse of the monster he kept so carefully leashed, and a shameful, treacherous part of her had found it thrilling. To be protected with such absolute possessive ferocity. It was a feeling she'd never known, and it lit a slow, dangerous fire deep inside her. Back at the cabin, the fragile sense of normalcy they'd found at the rodeo evaporated. A storm was rolling in from the west, the same way it had on that first night. The wind moaned through the pines, a mournful, lonely sound. After tucking a restless Lila into bed, Clara stepped out onto the porch. She needed the cool, damp air to clear her head, to chase away the confusing mix of fear and desire that Elias ignited in her. She wrapped her arms around herself, watching the distant flicker of lightning. The world felt quiet. Too quiet. Over the sound of the wind, she heard it. A single, sharp snap. A twig breaking under a heavy foot. Her entire body went rigid. Her eyes darted toward the tree line, a wall of impenetrable black. It was probably just a deer, an animal. Then, with a sudden, final flicker, the lights in the cabin behind her went out. The generator had been cut. They were plunged into an inky, profound darkness. Panic, cold and immediate, seized her. Elias! From the trees they emerged, not two this time. 4 of them, moving fast. Their forms were bulky silhouettes against the stormy sky, heading straight for the house, straight for the front door, straight for Lila's room. Elias burst out of the house, a dark shape of coiled fury. "Get back inside! Lock the door!" he yelled, but it was too late. One of the bikers was faster than the others. He vaulted onto the porch, a sickening grin on his face, his hand reaching for the doorknob. Lila was right on the other side. There was no time to think, no time to be afraid. Something inside Clara broke. A dam of fear and denial that she had maintained her entire life shattered into a million pieces. A sound ripped from her throat, a sound she didn't recognize. It was a scream of pure, protective rage. But it was deeper, more guttural, a snarl that was more animal than human. She didn't grab a weapon. She became one. She launched herself forward, grabbing a heavy log from the firewood pile. The world seemed to slow down. Heat exploded behind her eyes. Her senses erupted. She could smell the sour sweat of the man's fear, hear the frantic pounding of his heart, see the shocked widening of his pupils in the gloom. An impossible strength, a raw, primal power flooded her limbs. She swung the heavy log with a force she shouldn't have possessed, connecting with the side of the biker's head with a sickening crunch. He staggered back, shock and pain on his face, before crumpling to the porch floor. The moment of primal power vanished as quickly as it came, leaving her weak, gasping, trembling. The log fell from her numb fingers. Elias was a whirlwind of brutal efficiency in the yard, the sounds of the fight terrifyingly brief, but she hardly noticed. She was staring at the man on the floor, at her own hands, horrified and stunned by what she had just done, by what she had just felt. When the sudden silence fell, Elias was at her side. He ignored the bodies in the yard, his entire focus on her. He saw her shaking, her eyes wide with shock and self-revulsion. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her jaw, forcing her to look at him. His gaze was impossibly intense, seeing right through her terror to the source of her turmoil. He leaned in, his voice a low, hypnotic whisper that cut through the sound of the storm. "Don't be afraid of it," he murmured, his thumb stroking her cheek. "Your wolf is begging to be free." Chapter 10. The Devil. You know his words hung in the air between them, a 4-word cage. Your wolf is begging. Clara stumbled back into the cabin, slamming the door shut, the heavy wood a pathetic shield against the truth he was trying to force on her. Denial was her only weapon. She was Clara, a saloon girl, a sister, the daughter of a man who had chosen the beast over his family. She was not that. The power she'd felt, the guttural snarl that had ripped from her own throat. It was just adrenaline, fear. It had to be. To believe otherwise was to accept that the monster she'd spent her life running from was already inside her. The days that followed were suffocating. A thick, icy silence stretched between her and Elias. He watched her, his gaze heavy with a silent, frustrated plea. She avoided him, her fear twisting into a bitter resentment. He was the devil on her shoulder, whispering poison, trying to coax out a part of her she had to keep buried. If she let it out, she would lose herself, she would become her father. She needed an answer, something to prove that her mistrust was justified, that he was the danger, not her. Her search was a quiet, frantic thing she conducted while he was outside. She didn't know what she was looking for, but she'd know it when she saw it. In the barn, tucked away in the bottom of an old, dusty tack box beneath some stiff leather straps, she found it. A leather vest. Not the simple, clean one he wore now. This one was old, cracked, stained with the memory of 100 violent nights. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded it. There, on the back, faded by sun and time, was the patch. A snarling wolf's head, circled by thorns. The air left her lungs in a rush. It was the exact same insignia as the outlaws who had attacked her in the alley, the ones who had marked his gate with blood. The breath she sucked in was a ragged, painful thing. He hadn't just ridden with a crew. He had ridden with them. The monster in her house wasn't just a protector. He was one of the very creatures hunting her. The man whose scent clung to the shirt she wore, whose presence made a treacherous part of her feel safe, was her greatest enemy. When he came in for dinner, she was waiting. She didn't speak. She just threw the vest on the table between them. It landed with a heavy, final thud. His eyes fell to the vest, and for a moment, something like pain flashed across his face. He looked up at her, his expression grim. "Clara, don't," she hissed, the word sharp with the agony of betrayal. "Don't you dare say my name. All this time, letting me believe you were protecting me from them. You are them." "That was a long time ago," he said, his voice a low gravel. "I left that life. I am not that person anymore." "It doesn't matter," she cried, her voice breaking. "The same darkness that's in them is inside you. How can I ever trust you? How can I know you won't turn on us just like my father did?" Before he could answer, the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway announced a visitor. A large black truck pulled to a stop, and an older man with silver-streaked hair and a calm, authoritative air got out. He was a shifter. She could feel the quiet power radiating from him. Elias's entire demeanor shifted. The pained man vanished, replaced by the cold, hard sheriff. He turned his back on Clara, facing the newcomer. "Marcus," Elias greeted him, his tone flat. "Thanks for coming." The man, Marcus, nodded, his eyes flicking to Clara, taking in her tear-streaked face and the outlaw vest on the table. "Trouble?" Elias let out a short, dismissive laugh. He looked over his shoulder at Clara, but his eyes were chips of ice. There was no warmth, no connection, nothing. "She's nothing to me," he said, the words striking her with the force of a physical blow. "Just a human I pulled out of a ditch. Her problems are her own. I'm done with it." The world tilted, the floor falling away beneath her. It was a lie. It had to be a lie. But his voice, his eyes, they were utterly convincing. He was casting her out, severing the invisible tether that had bound them together. In front of this powerful stranger, he was publicly, brutally, rejecting her. And in the silent, soul-tearing agony that followed, she knew this was a betrayal from which there was no coming back. Chapter 11. A Ghost at the Door. The lie was a shard of glass in his throat. Elias watched the light die in Clara's eyes, saw the way her soul seemed to collapse inward, and the bond they shared screamed in protest. It was a physical agony, a tearing deep inside him, a wolf howling at having its mate savaged. But he held his ground. He kept his face a mask of indifference, because her thinking he was a heartless bastard was infinitely better than her being dead. He had to make Marcus, and by extension the patriarch, believe she was no longer under his protection. It was the only way to get them to lower their guard. "I'm declaring the territory neutral," he told the elder, his voice firm. The girl and her sister are on their own. My duty is to the human laws of this town, nothing more." Marcus raised a silver eyebrow, his gaze shrewd. "A bold move, Sheriff. Dangerous." "They're not my problem," Elias repeated, the words tasting like poison. After a few more minutes of strained conversation, the elder left, his truck disappearing down the long drive. The moment he was gone, the facade crumbled. Elias staggered back, his hand pressed to his chest as if to hold himself together. The backlash from the bond was a physical wave of nausea and pain, a hollow echo of the devastation he had just inflicted on Clara. He heard a choked sob from the house, and then the sound of her bedroom door slamming shut. He couldn't follow her. He couldn't explain. Not yet. He retreated to the barn, the familiar sense of hay and leather doing nothing to soothe the raging beast inside him. His wolf was clawing at the bars of its cage, furious at the rejection, at the self-inflicted wound. He slammed his fist into a heavy wooden support beam, the pain a welcome distraction. He was failing. Again. Just like he had failed before. An image of a smiling, red-haired woman flashed in his mind. Camilla. The fire. Her screams. The scent of her burning. He had built this entire lonely, miserable existence on the ashes of that failure. He would not fail again. He would not let another innocent be consumed by the fire of his world. "Feeling sorry for yourself, my love?" The voice was a whisper from a nightmare. Silky. Mocking. Impossible. He froze, every muscle in his body locking down. He knew that voice. He had heard it in his dreams for 5 long years. Slowly, he turned. A figure stepped out from behind a stack of hay bales, moving from shadow into the dim light. Red hair cascaded over her shoulders, catching the light like threads of blood. Her smile was a cold, perfect curve. It was her. Camilla. The world stopped turning. This couldn't be real. A ghost. A hallucination brought on by grief and stress. "You're dead," he breathed, the words barely a rasp. "Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated," she purred, circling him like a shark. She looked exactly the same, not a day older, not a single scar from the fire that had supposedly claimed her. "I have to say I'm disappointed. A log cabin? Really? I thought you'd have bigger ambitions." Shock was a paralyzing venom. The woman he had mourned, the mate whose death had been the defining tragedy of his life, was standing in front of him. Alive. And her scent. Beneath the familiar perfume, it was wrong. It was tainted. It carried the faint, unmistakable musk of another wolf. A scent he'd smelled on the bikers, on the stranger at the rodeo. The scent of the patriarch. The realization hit him like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs and shattering the very foundation of his world. The grief, the guilt, the 5 years of self-imposed exile. It was all built on a lie. "The fire," he choked out. "A necessary bit of theater," she said with a shrug. "To ensure your cooperation, to break you down so completely that you'd run and hide and become this sad little lawman." Her cold eyes glittered. "You see, you were never my mate, Elias. You were my mission." She had been a spy, a plant, from the very beginning. Her love had been a lie, their bond a fabrication, her death a strategic move in a game he never even knew he was playing. The ultimate betrayal wasn't that she had died. It was that she had never been his at all. Chapter 12. The first shift. The pain was a physical thing, a sickness that left her hollowed out and shaking. Clara lay on her bed, curled into a tight ball, Elias's cold, dismissive words playing over and over in her head. "She's nothing to me." It was a clean cut, severing a connection she hadn't even realized had grown so deep. The rejection felt like it was killing her from the inside out, a strange, elemental agony that her human mind couldn't process, but her blood understood completely. It was the bond, withering under the alpha's denial. Through the fog of her own misery, she heard voices from downstairs, Elias, and a woman. Her voice was like honey laced with poison. Curiosity, a desperate need to understand this new layer of betrayal, warred with her grief. Tiptoeing to her door, she crept down the hallway until she could peer through the banister into the main room below. What she saw made her blood run cold. A woman with hair the color of fire stood there, speaking to Elias with a terrifying, intimate familiarity. It was the woman from the photograph. The ghost. "The patriarch is losing his patience," the woman, Camilla, said, her tone sharp. "He wants the girl. He doesn't care about your little games." "What does he really want with her?" Elias's voice was strained, raw with a pain Clara didn't understand. Camilla laughed, a sound with no warmth. "You still don't get it, do you? The old legends are true. Lila isn't just some shifter brat with a strong bloodline. She's a keystone, a once-in-a-generation wolf whose first shift can be used to anchor an alpha's power directly to the ley lines of the territory. Whoever holds her when she turns holds the land. He won't just be an alpha, he'll be a god here. And her little awakening at the rodeo tells us it's going to be very, very soon." The words were a physical shock, stealing the air from Clara's lungs. A keystone. This wasn't about revenge on her father anymore. Lila wasn't just a target. She was the prize in a war for ultimate power. Just then, another set of headlights swept across the windows. The front door opened and the elder Marcus stepped inside. Hope, fragile and desperate, sparked in Clara's chest. He was here to help. He would stop this. But then Marcus looked at Camilla and gave a slow, respectful nod. "Is there a problem?" he asked her, not Elias. "Our sheriff was having second thoughts," Camilla answered smoothly. "Remind him what's at stake." Marcus turned his calm, grandfatherly eyes on Elias. "The patriarch has been good to my pack. He offers stability, strength. Your resistance is a threat to that peace. Give him the girl, Elias. Let the new era begin." Betrayal upon betrayal. The elder, the calm voice of reason and neutrality, was a traitor. He was working with them. There was no one to trust. No neighboring pack to run to. No authority to appeal to. There was only the man who had publicly disowned her and the monsters who wanted to use her sister as a key to unlock godhood. The weight of it all, Elias's rejection, the ghost of Camilla, the elder's treachery, the horrifying truth of what they wanted with Lila, crashed down on her at once. A wave of fury, grief, and sheer, hopeless terror washed over her. It was too much. The pain in her soul, the agony of the broken bond, it all crested into something unbearable. A low groan of pain escaped her lips. She stumbled back from the stairs, retreating to Lila's room. Her sister was sleeping fitfully, whimpering. The full moon, huge and white, shone through the window, bathing the room in an ethereal glow. Clara fell to her knees, a scream building in her chest. Downstairs, every shifter head snapped up. A new scent suddenly filled the house. It was sharp, electric, the smell of ozone and raw, untamed magic. The unmistakable scent of a wolf's first, agonizing transformation. A pained, inhuman cry echoed from the second floor, followed by the sound of tearing fabric and the splintering of wood. The beacon was lit. The hunt was over. The keystone had been found. Chapter 13. The beast within chaos erupted. The scent of Lila's transformation, a sharp electric smell like ozone after a lightning strike, was a scream in the supernatural silence of the room. It was a beacon, a dinner bell, a declaration. Elias, his face a mask of horror, lunged for the stairs, but Camilla was faster. She moved to block him, her smile a predatory slash. Marcus, the traitorous elder, stepped to her side, his calm demeanor now looking like cold complicity. "The girl belongs to the patriarch now, Sheriff," Camilla purred. "It's over." Upstairs was a nightmare. The bedroom was a wreck of splintered wood and torn fabric. Huddled in the corner, whimpering, was a small, trembling wolf pup. Its fur was a beautiful silver gray, its eyes wide with a terror and confusion that were purely Lila's. All of Clara's fear, all her revulsion for the beast she saw in her father, evaporated in an instant. This wasn't a monster. This was her sister. Her baby sister, trapped in a terrifying new form, alone and in pain. Her heart didn't break. It solidified into a diamond-hard point of pure, uncut protectiveness. "It's okay, little wolf," she whispered, moving slowly, her hands held out. "It's okay. I'm here." A loud crash from downstairs shattered the moment, glass exploding. A man's guttural yell. They were inside. Someone was coming. She heard heavy boots pounding up the stairs. A hulking shape filled the doorway, one of the patriarch's men, his face twisted in a hungry grin. He saw the wolf pup and his eyes lit with triumph. Elias was still trapped downstairs, his frustrated roar echoing from below. There was no one else. Clara was the only thing standing between this monster and her sister. He lunged for Lila. Time seemed to warp, stretching like hot taffy. The world dissolved into a tunnel of pure, primal instinct. The rage she'd felt on the porch came back, but this time it was a tidal wave, a wildfire. A snarl ripped from her own throat, tearing its way out of a place deep inside her she never knew existed. Her vision bled to red at the edges. A searing heat shot through her bones, her fingernails thickening and elongating into wicked, curved claws. Her teeth ached, her canines sharpening into fangs. The beast within her didn't just stir. It rose to meet the threat with a fury that was all her own. She met the man's charge not with a clumsy log, but with her own body. She was faster, stronger, her movements guided by an ancient, lethal grace. She slammed into him, the impact sending him stumbling back with a shocked cry. He stared at her glowing eyes, at the claws now digging into his arm, and his hunter's grin dissolved into disbelief and fear. With a scream that was half human, half wolf, she shoved him with all her might. He tumbled backward, crashing through the flimsy banister and landing in a heap on the floor below. The red haze receded, leaving her gasping, her body trembling with the backlash of a power she couldn't comprehend. She looked at her hands, at the claws slowly retracting, horrified, and undeniably, terrifyingly thrilled. She had done that. She had protected her own. Elias was at her side a second later, the sounds of the fight below already silenced. He looked from the groaning man downstairs to her, his gaze taking in her heaving chest, her wild eyes, but there was no fear in his expression, only a profound, knowing awe. He gently took her trembling hand, his fingers warm and steady as he wrapped them around her own. "See?" he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "It isn't a curse. It's a part of you. It's the part that just saved your sister." In that instant, something inside her shifted permanently. This power wasn't her father's legacy of shame. It was her own. It was a shield, a weapon, a birthright. And she would never be afraid of it again. Chapter 14. A Mate's Confession. The immediate aftermath was a tense, ragged silence. The unconscious attacker lay groaning at the bottom of the ruined staircase. Camilla and Marcus, seeing their easy victory implode, had vanished into the night like the wraiths they were. The house was a disaster, a testament to the battle that had just torn through it. But the most immediate crisis was the small silver wolf pup still whimpering in the bedroom. The battle was over, but the trauma was just beginning. "She's terrified," Clara breathed, her newfound acceptance of her own wolf doing little to prepare her for the reality of her sister's. "I don't know what to do." Elias guided her, his voice low and steady, a calm anchor in the storm. "She needs her pack. Right now, that's you. Let her smell you. Project Calm. Your wolf knows what to do, even if you don't." He was right. As Clara sat on the floor, murmuring softly to Lila, an instinct she didn't know she possessed took over. She focused on a feeling of safety, of love, pushing it out like a scent, a warmth. Slowly, tentatively, The little wolf crept forward and nudged Clara's hand with her wet nose before curling into an exhausted sleeping ball in her lap. The sight was both heartbreaking and beautiful. After they had moved the sleeping pup to the bed, the fragile peace shattered, leaving only the 1,000 questions that hung between them. The lies had all been burned away. Now, only the truth remained. They sat in the wrecked living room, the moonlight painting stripes across the floor. Elias finally looked at her, his face etched with a pain so deep it seemed to carve new lines into his skin. He told her everything. He spoke of a different pack, a different life. He told her about a fire, an ambush set by the patriarch's followers years ago, and about the mate he had watched burn, the woman he had failed to save. The real Camilla. The ghost who had stood in this very room was a lie, a cruel imposter who had stolen a dead woman's name. "My rejection of you," he said, his voice raw. "In front of Marcus, it was a desperate move. I thought if they believed you meant nothing to me, they might leave you alone. It was the only thing I could think of to protect you. It was a lie, Clara. Every word of it." Then, he took a deep breath and confessed the deepest truth of all. "The moment I saw you, the first day I smelled your scent on the wind, my wolf knew. It recognized you. It's the mate bond. After all these years, after I swore I would never, you're my second chance. My true mate." The words settled over her, a stunning, impossible revelation that made her heart ache with a hope she hadn't realized she'd been searching for. It explained the pull, the connection, the feeling of rightness she felt even when she was terrified of him. It was fate. But just as that beautiful hope began to bloom, he delivered a killing blow. "But I can't complete the bond," he whispered, and the agony in his voice was absolute. "I can't mark you." "What? Why?" He looked at his own hands as if they were weapons. "My wolf. It's not right. After the fire, after watching my first mate die, it was damaged. It's too violent, too steeped in grief and rage. When an alpha marks his mate, for a moment, the beast has complete control. There's no thought, only instinct." He finally met her eyes, his own shining with unshed tears. "And I'm terrified that in that moment, my wolf will see her ghost instead of you, or remember the fire, or see you as a threat to be contained, and it will kill you. The very act that should bind us forever would be your death sentence." The cruel irony of it was staggering. To be fated for a man whose love was so broken it could destroy her. Before she could even process the impossible choice that lay before them, the back door of the cabin exploded inward, splintering off its hinges. Camilla stood there, a cruel smile on her face, flanked by more of the patriarch's wolves. In the chaos of the confession, they had been forgotten. In the blink of an eye, they stormed the house. 2 of them charged upstairs. A moment later, they were back, a sleeping silver wolf pup held firmly in their grasp. Lila was gone. Chapter 15. The Price of Surrender. The silence that descended was a cold, dead thing. It was the silence of a hollowed-out world, of a heart that had been ripped from its chest. Lila was gone. The space where she had been sleeping just minutes ago was a gaping wound in the fabric of the universe. Elias stood amidst the wreckage of his home, blood dripping from a gash on his forearm, his face a mask of such profound fury and self-hatred that it was hard to look at him. He had failed. The word hung in the air between them, unspoken and absolute. He had let history repeat itself. Clara's grief was a physical assault, a wave of ice and fire that threatened to drown her. But beneath the pain, something else was stirring. It was the wolf. Her wolf. It was not grieving. It was snarling. It was a cornered animal, its cub stolen, and it was pacing the cage of her soul, desperate for vengeance, for action. Despair was a luxury. Rage was a weapon. She began to pace the ruined room, her mind racing. They had taken Lila because she was a keystone. They needed her alive, needed her for her first shift to be complete. That was their leverage. But it was also their weakness. A sharp, tinny ringing, cut through the quiet. One of the bikers, in his haste, had dropped his phone. The screen glowed with an unknown number. With a shaking hand, Clara answered it. "I was hoping you'd be the one to pick up," Camilla's silky voice purred from the other end. "Let's make this simple. Your sister is safe. For now. The patriarch is a man of tradition. He believes in an eye for an eye, a wolf for a wolf." "What do you want?" Clara's voice was a low, dangerous thing she didn't recognize. "You," Camilla said simply. "Your bloodline for hers. Surrender yourself at the old abandoned silver mill on the edge of the territory. Come alone. Do that, and we will let your sister go. You have until dawn." The line went dead. Clara looked at the phone, then at Elias. The path forward was horrifyingly clear. Lila was the prize, the key to immense power. Clara was just bait, expendable. Her life for her sisters. There was no choice. It wasn't even a decision. "I'm going," she said, her voice devoid of fear. It was a statement of fact. She would walk into the fire for Lila. It was the only move she had left to play, a final act of sacrifice that showed just how far she had come from the frightened girl hiding in the saloon. Elias, who had been standing still as a statue, finally moved. He straightened to his full height, and the air in the room seemed to crackle and drop 10 degrees. The grieving man was gone. The haunted sheriff was gone. All that remained was the alpha, raw, untamed, and pushed far beyond his breaking point. He crossed the room in 2 long strides and took the phone from her hand, his fingers closing around it until the plastic groaned and shattered. "No," he growled, the single word a promise of total war. He stepped closer, his presence a tidal wave of pure, possessive power, his eyes blazing with a golden fire that eclipsed all the pain and restraint he'd ever shown. "They took my family from me once. They tried to take my mate." He reached up, his hands cupping her face, his gaze locking with hers, sealing a pact between them in that moment of shared desperation. His voice dropped to a deadly, hypnotic whisper that was the most terrifying and beautiful sound she had ever heard. "I will burn their entire world to the ground before I let them have you." Chapter 16, The Silver Mill. Hope was a dangerous, fragile thing, but for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, it bloomed in Clara's chest. Elias's promise to burn the world for her was not a threat. It was a vow. It was the birth of a terrifying, beautiful us. The despair was gone, burned away by the clean, white-hot fire of a shared purpose. War was coming, and they would face it together. Their plan was desperate, a long shot born from the ashes of their ruined home. They couldn't wait for dawn. They would go now, a direct assault on the old silver mill, using the element of surprise as their only real weapon. Elias armed himself with a cold, grim efficiency, pulling weapons from a hidden locker she never knew existed. A shotgun, a heavy silver-bladed knife, a look in his eyes that was far deadlier than any steel. They moved through the night like ghosts, his truck a dark shadow on unlit back roads. The mill was a skeleton against the moonlit sky, a jagged ruin of rusted metal and broken stone, a place where industry had died and something monstrous had moved in. The air itself felt sick, heavy with the scent of dozens of wolves and the faint, coppery tang of old blood. They left the truck a mile out, approaching on foot through the dense, silent pines. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, was amplified in the tense quiet. They were almost to the main building, moving from shadow to shadow when the world erupted. Floodlights blazed to life, turning the night to a harsh, artificial day. It was a trap. They had been expected. Wolves poured from the crumbling buildings, a wave of snarls and hungry eyes. Elias was a blur of motion, a force of nature unleashed. He moved with a brutal, devastating grace, the shotgun barking, the silver knife a flashing arc of death in the gloom. He was magnificent. He was terrifying. He fought like a cornered god, a whirlwind of controlled fury. But he was just one man, one wolf, against a tide. In the chaos of the fight, a brute of a wolf slammed into her, sending her spinning away from Elias's side. She landed hard, the air knocked from her lungs. Before she could recover, another figure was on her. Camilla. Her face was a mask of triumphant hatred. "You pathetic little stray," the redhead hissed, her nails digging into Clara's arms. "Did you really think you could replace me? He'll never love you. He's still mourning me." Rage, pure and undiluted, surged through Clara. She felt the now familiar heat behind her eyes, the ache in her teeth. But just as she was about to unleash the beast within, a small, terrified cry cut through the din of the fight. "Clara!" Her head snapped up. There, in a second-story window of the main mill building, was a cage, and inside it, pacing frantically in her small silver wolf form, was Lila. The sight of her sister, trapped and terrified, was a spear through Clara's heart. That single, fatal moment of distraction was all they needed. Something hard connected with the back of her head. The world dissolved into a sickening kaleidoscope of spinning lights and sharp, blinding pain. Then, nothing. She awoke to the rhythmic drip of water and the throbbing, relentless agony in her skull. She was tied to a steel chair, her muscles aching, her spirit a cold, dead weight in her chest. Elias was gone. The sounds of fighting had ceased. Camilla stood before her, wiping a speck of blood from her cheek with a manicured finger. She smiled. "Welcome to the end of the line, sweetheart." Lila was caged. Elias's fate was a terrifying unknown, and she was a prisoner in the heart of the enemy's den. Chapter 17, Whispers of the Cursed. He saw her fall. One moment, Clara was a fierce, defiant light in the chaos. The next, she was a crumpled form being dragged into the mill. A roar of pure, untamed agony ripped from Elias's throat, a sound that was more wolf than man. He fought to get to her, a desperate, reckless surge, but they were too many. They swarmed him, their attacks not meant to kill, but to herd, to contain. He was wounded, bleeding, his energy fading. He knew with a gut-wrenching certainty that a direct assault had failed. He had to retreat, to regroup, to survive. Because a dead alpha couldn't save anyone. He broke through their line, melting into the dark woods that were his element, the scent of Clara's fear and pain a torment that drove him onward. He couldn't win with brute force. He needed allies. He needed the other packs. His only hope was to expose Marcus as the traitor he was, to rally the neutral territories against the Patriarch's madness before it was too late. He ran all night, pushing through the pain of his injuries, and arrived at the Elders' packlands just after dawn. But he was too late. The poison had been spread before he ever got there. Camilla and the Patriarch had been busy. They had sent riders to every pack in a 100-mile radius, not with a declaration of war, but with a warning. They told stories. They twisted his past into a weapon, sharpening it to a lethal point. They spoke of an outlaw wolf, a man whose rage was so great it had consumed his own mate in a fire. They gave him a name, a title from a past he thought he had buried forever. The Butcher of Blackwood Ridge. They painted him as a cursed, unstable alpha, his grief twisting him into a monster who was now trying to steal a gifted child to seize power for himself. When he limped into the center of the camp, he wasn't met with neutrality. He was met with fear, with suspicion. Wolves he had known for years looked at him as if he were a rabid animal. Marcus stood before the grim-faced assembly, the very picture of a concerned, betrayed leader. "Elias," he said, his voice full of false sympathy. "We have heard what happened. Camilla told us everything. How you've been manipulating the traitor's daughter, trying to claim the Keystone pup for yourself." "He's a liar," Elias snarled, his voice raw. "He's working for the Patriarch." "Or perhaps," Marcus countered smoothly, his voice carrying to every listening ear, "your grief has finally broken your mind. You are not the man you once were. You are cursed, a danger to us all." The whispers started then, a low hiss that spread through the crowd. Cursed. killed his own mate. The butcher. Unfit. Every word was a nail in his coffin. His history, his greatest shame, was being used to crucify him, and it was working perfectly. He was alone, utterly and completely alone. No one would help him. No one would stand with him against the coming darkness. The weight of it all, the lies, the betrayals, Clara's capture, his own powerlessness, crashed down on him. The bond, stretched thin and frayed by distance and fear, felt like a raw, open wound in his soul. He could feel her terror, and it was feeding the beast inside him. His wolf, fueled by a righteous, helpless rage, began to surge against its cage. It wanted out. It wanted to tear these faithless, whispering cowards apart for their weakness. He fought it, his hands clenched into fists, his knuckles white with the strain. Veins stood out on his neck as he forced the monster back down. But the control he had spent 5 years perfecting was cracking. The whispers, the lies, the betrayal. They were all the proof the beast needed that his way, the human way, had failed. For a terrifying moment, he felt his own will begin to slip, drowning in a tide of pure, homicidal fury. He was losing himself to the very monster they all accused him of being. Chapter 18. The Fall of the Alpha. The cold stone walls of the silver mill wept with condensation, each drop a slow, steady tick of a clock counting down to the end. Clara was a prisoner, but her cage was gilded with information. Camilla, in her triumph, couldn't resist tormenting her, her voice a constant venomous drip. She told Clara twisted stories of Elias's past, painting him as a bloodthirsty animal who had murdered his first mate in a jealous rage. She was trying to poison the bond to break Clara's spirit with lies, but Clara's wolf, now awake and listening, knew the scent of truth. It recognized the lie in Camilla's words, and it held fast. Lila was nearby, still in her cage, the whimpers of the terrified wolf pup a constant, heartbreaking lament. Soon, the patriarch himself appeared. He wasn't the hulking beast she had imagined. He was a man in his prime, handsome, charismatic, with eyes that held the chilling calm of a true believer. He spoke to Clara not as a prisoner, but as a potential convert. "Power is not a right. It is a burden, my dear," he said, his voice smooth and reasonable. "The packs have grown weak, soft, aping human laws. I intend to restore the old ways, the true ways. Your sister is not a prisoner. She is the key to our salvation. And Elias, he is a relic, a broken wolf who clings to a world that has no place for him. He is coming, of course. His pathetic bond to you will drag him here, and when he arrives he will die, not just by my hand, but by the judgment of all the packs who have finally seen him for the monster he truly is." As if on cue, a commotion erupted outside. Elias was here, but he didn't sneak in. He didn't use stealth. He walked through the main entrance of the mill, into the cavernous central chamber where they waited. He was alone, wounded, his face a grim mask of resolve. It was a final, desperate challenge. An alpha, stripped of his pack and his allies, making his last stand. "Let them go, patriarch." Elias's voice boomed, raw and powerful. The patriarch simply smiled. "You are a fool, Elias. You stand alone." "He is never alone when he stands for what is right," Clara screamed from her bonds. Elias looked at her, and in his eyes, she saw a flicker of the man she loved, a silent thank you. Then his eyes blazed gold. His body convulsed, a scream of agony and fury tearing from his lips as he surrendered to the beast. The transformation was not a thing of magic, but of raw, violent power. Bones snapped and reformed, skin stretched. A massive black-furred wolf stood where the man had been, its snarl a promise of death. He fought like a legend, a force of nature, a ghost of vengeance. He was a whirlwind of black fur and flashing claws, and for a glorious, hopeful moment, it seemed like he might actually win. But it was a trap. The patriarch's wolves didn't meet his charge head-on. They bled him. They flanked him, darting in with quick, shallow bites, hurting him, wearing down his stamina, forcing him to expend his rage on a dozen fronts at once. From her vantage point, Clara watched the horrific one-sided battle. She saw the magnificent black wolf begin to slow. His movements became heavier, his breath coming in ragged pants. He was bleeding from a dozen different wounds. Then, the patriarch himself stepped forward, a heavy silver-laced blade in his hand. In a final chaotic clash of bodies, he found his opening. The blade plunged deep into the black wolf's side. A howl of pure, unadulterated agony ripped through the mill, a sound that tore at Clara's very soul. The great wolf staggered, its powerful legs buckling. It collapsed to the stone floor in a heap, the body shrinking, contorting, shifting back into the form of a broken, bleeding man. Elias fell and lay still. The fiery, vibrant bond that had connected their souls, the tether that screamed with his pain and her fear, suddenly went silent, cold, empty. It was as if her own heart had simply stopped beating. All hope, all light, all sound died in that moment. She stared at his unmoving form, a single, silent tear tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. A whisper, a final, defiant vow to the sudden, terrible emptiness escaped her lips. "Elias," she breathed. "If fate kills him, I'll choose him anyway." Chapter 19. A Vow of Fury. The silence where the bond had been was a sucking void, a wound in the universe. Clara's soul felt cold, empty, a hollowed-out gourd. Elias was gone. The flicker of warmth that had been a constant presence at the back of her mind for weeks was extinguished. The patriarch was laughing, a sound of triumphant cruelty that echoed in the cavernous mill. Camilla stood at his side, her expression smug, victorious. They had won. They turned their attention from Elias's still form to the cage where Lila whimpered, ready to begin the final horrific stage of their plan. Grief was a bottomless ocean, and Clara was drowning in it. But her last whisper, her vow to a dead man, "I'll choose him anyway," was more than just words. It was a seed. In the cold, dead soil of her despair, that seed of defiance began to grow. The emptiness of the broken bond was not an end. It was a space waiting to be filled, not with grief but with rage. Her sorrow didn't break her. It burned her clean. It incinerated the last remnants of her fear, her denial, her weakness. All that remained was a pure, cold, diamond-hard fury. A rage for her sister, who was about to be sacrificed. A rage for her mate, who had been murdered before her very eyes. A rage for herself, for allowing herself to be a victim for so long. As the patriarch reached for the latch on Lila's cage, that rage erupted. Clara didn't think. She acted. She focused on the cold fire in her soul, on the vows she had made, on the ferocious, unending love she felt for the two people they had taken from her. She didn't fight the beast inside her anymore. She didn't try to cage it. She opened the door, threw it wide, and invited it in. She called to it. She begged it for its strength. The transformation was a symphony of agony. It was a baptism in a river of fire. Every bone in her body felt like it was breaking and reforming, every muscle tearing and restitching itself into something new, something powerful. But she didn't scream. She gritted her teeth and endured the pain, fueled by the singular, burning purpose that now defined her entire existence. This pain was nothing compared to the agony of her loss. This was power. This was rebirth. She rose from her bonds, not as a girl, but as a wolf. The room was shocked into a stunned silence. She was not a terrified, trembling pup like Lila. She was a sleek, powerful she-wolf, her fur the color of a moonless midnight, her body a whipcord of lean muscle built for speed and lethality. Her eyes, the only part of her that remained the same, burned with a cold, intelligent, and utterly merciless fury. They had been so focused on the keystone, the prize, that they had forgotten about the protector, the bait. They had made a fatal error. Clara, in her full wolf form, was the variable they had not accounted for. She was no longer a pawn in their game. She was a player. She moved with a silent, fluid grace, placing her body between the patriarch and Lila's cage. A low, deadly growl rumbled in her chest, a sound that was not a plea or a threat, but a simple statement of fact. You will not touch her. She was no longer running from the world that had killed the man she loved. She was going to burn it to the ground. Chapter 20. The anchor bite darkness. A cold, silent river pulling him under. Elias was dying, and he welcomed it. He had failed. He had lost her. He had lost everything. The pain was gone, replaced by a profound, floating emptiness. There was nothing left to fight for, no reason to hold on. He let himself drift, sinking into the quiet oblivion that promised an end to his long, miserable failure of a life. Let it end. But then, a scent. Wildflowers and rain and righteous fury. Clara. A flicker of warmth in the endless cold. A pinprick of light in the suffocating dark. And then, pain. Sharp, searing, electric. It lanced through the numbness, sinking deep into the flesh of his shoulder. It was a bite. Not the tearing slash of an enemy, but something else entirely. It was an anchor. A jolt of raw, vibrant energy flooded his dying body, a shock that restarted his heart. The bond between them, the connection he thought had been severed forever, flared back to life. It wasn't the roaring, out-of-control fire it had been before. This was a steady, determined flame, a lifeline thrown across the void, pulling him back from the brink. It was her strength, her life force, her will pouring into him. His eyes fluttered open. A magnificent, midnight-furred wolf stood over him, her jaws gently clamped on his shoulder. Her eyes, so fiercely human, stared into his, pleading, commanding, willing him to live. He understood. She hadn't completed the bond, hadn't tried to perform the alpha's mark. This was something else. An instinctual, desperate act of a mate refusing to let go, sharing her own strength to keep his spirit tethered to his broken body. It was the most profound act of love he had ever known. The sight of her, so powerful and defiant, reignited the will to fight that he thought had been extinguished. She hadn't given up. How could he? The patriarch and his followers were momentarily stunned, their attention fixed on the impossible sight of the second wolf, the one who was supposed to be a helpless human. They had a window, a chance. A silent, primal understanding passed between man and wolf, between mate and mate. He couldn't fight, not like this. But she could run. They had to get Lila. Painfully, using the last of the strength she was lending him, Elias pushed himself to a sitting position. At the same moment, Clara's wolf launched herself forward, not at the patriarch, but at the cage. She was a black blur of motion, a chaotic, unexpected diversion. She slammed into the cage, not trying to break it, but to knock it from its perch. It crashed to the floor, the latch bursting open from the impact. In the ensuing confusion, as the pack scrambled to recover, Elias gathered the last of his energy. He saw the small silver wolf pup tumble out of the broken cage. "Lila! Run!" he roared. Clara's wolf was already there, nudging her sister, herding her toward a broken wall and the darkness of the woods beyond. Elias staggered to his feet, using his own body as a momentary obstacle, a final desperate shield. It was enough. The two wolves, one sleek and dark, the other small and silver, vanished into the night. Wounded, bleeding, but with a new, impossible hope burning in his chest, Elias stumbled after them into the welcoming shadows. They were alive. They were together. But they were far from safe. Chapter 21. United in Shadow. They found sanctuary in a place of ghosts, an old abandoned forest ranger's cabin that Elias had discovered years ago, a place so deep in the woods it had been forgotten by maps and men. Lila, terrified and exhausted by the ordeal, had shifted back into her small human form as soon as they were clear of the mill. The three of them were a broken, battered pack, huddled together in the dusty dark, the world reduced to the four crumbling walls of their refuge. Elias was fading fast, the wound in his side a deep mortal agony. He was alive only because of the anchor bite, a constant warm pulse of Clara's strength flowing into him, a shared life force that was both exhilarating and draining for her. The night was long. There was no room left for lies, no time for secrets. They tended to each other's wounds by the light of a single flickering lantern. Clara's wolf was a calm, steady presence at the forefront of her mind now, a partner, not a passenger. It lent her a focus she'd never known. Elias, his voice weak but his eyes lucid, finally told her the rest of it. He explained the ritual of the keystone, how it had to be performed at the absolute peak of the full moon, on a convergence of the territory's ley lines, the land's heart. They knew where the final battle would have to be fought, an ancient clearing of standing stones, miles from here. "He will expect us," Elias rasped, his hand finding hers in the gloom. "He will be waiting." "Then we won't keep him waiting long," she replied, her voice steady. Her fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. They prepared for the dawn. This wasn't about a desperate, chaotic fight anymore. It was about strategy, about survival, about their future. For the first time, they were truly united. Not by fate, not by a primal bond, but by a conscious, deliberate choice. Elias looked at the fierce determination in her eyes, at the woman who had shifted into a wolf to save him, and for the first time since the fire, he let go of the fear of his own beast. He would no longer cage it. He would aim it. Clara, in turn, looked at the wounded man who had been willing to die for her, and she fully embraced her new role. She was not just a survivor. She was a protector, an alpha in her own right. As the first gray fingers of dawn crept through the dirty cabin window, they moved. They left Lila hidden in a small, magically warded root cellar beneath the cabin, a sanctuary Elias had prepared long ago. Then they walked out into the misty woods side by side. He was still weak, leaning on her for support, but the golden fire was back in his eyes. They approached the clearing of standing stones, a place that pulsed with a quiet, ancient power. Just as they stepped past the first stone, the rogue pack emerged from the trees, surrounding them, their forms like gray ghosts in the morning mist. There was no surprise, no ambush, just a final, grim appointment. The patriarch stepped forward from their ranks, his confident smile firmly in place. Elias straightened up, pulling away from Clara's support. He stood on his own 2 feet, his gaze locked on his enemy. A low growl started deep in his chest, a promise of the war to come. Clara stood at his side, a warrior, a mate. Her own wolf answered his, a snarl of defiance echoing in the sacred clearing. They were wounded, outnumbered, and standing on the edge of oblivion. But they were finally, truly, together. The showdown was about to begin. Chapter 22, The Heart of the Land. The air in the clearing was taut as a bowstring, humming with an ancient, raw power. The patriarch stood in the center of the standing stones, his arms raised, his voice a low chant in a forgotten guttural tongue. He was trying to force the ritual, to pull the power from the ley lines through sheer will. His arrogance was a tangible thing, a belief in his own destiny so absolute that he saw the 2 wounded wolves before him as a final, insignificant obstacle. He was wrong. The battle began not with a roar, but with a shared glance, a silent pact, a promise. Then, they moved. They were a symphony of violence, a dance of death. Elias was no longer the lone, raging berserker. Clara was no longer the frightened girl. They were 2 halves of a single lethal entity. He was the bulwark, a wall of raw, focused power, his fury a controlled inferno that met the enemy's charge and broke it. She was the shadow, a flicker of midnight fur, her movements swift and strategic, a blade that slipped through their defenses to strike at the weak points. They moved without words, their thoughts and intentions flowing between them through the raw, open channel of the bond. It was a perfect, brutal partnership. His world was scent and sound, and the burning need to protect the she-wolf at his side. He felt the ripple of muscle under an attacker's skin, smelled the sour tang of his fear, and met it with a strength born of a love he had just reclaimed. Her world was motion and instinct and the fierce, brilliant fire of her new self. She saw the path between their enemies before they moved, felt the shift in the air that signaled an attack, and countered it with a grace and lethality that was as natural as breathing. They fought their way through the throng of lesser wolves, a relentless, unstoppable tide, their eyes fixed on the true enemy, the patriarch. He met them with a power that was more than just his own. The ground itself seemed to empower him, the ancient stones glowing with a faint, sickly light. The final confrontation was a maelstrom of claws and fangs and desperate, world-ending fury. The patriarch was strong, his blows hammering at Elias's already wounded body. He reopened the gash in Elias's side, and the strength Clara had lent him began to pour out onto the thirsty ground. Elias staggered, his vision blurring, the black wolf form flickering as his life force faded. He was falling. Again. Clara saw it. She felt it through the bond, the cold tide of death pulling him under for the final time. The anchor bite wasn't enough. Her strength alone couldn't heal a mortal wound. There was only one choice left, a terrible, forbidden gamble. With the patriarch momentarily off balance from a desperate lunge, she moved. She did not attack their enemy. She launched herself at her mate. She drove him to the ground, her wolf's body covering his, shielding him. Ignoring his pained, confused growl, she did the one thing he had begged her not to. She sank her fangs deep into the side of his neck, directly over the faint, invisible mark of the alpha. She didn't just anchor him, she claimed him. She poured her entire being, her life force, her will, her very soul into him, completing the bond from her side. It was an act of ultimate surrender and absolute dominance. A violent electric surge arced between them. For a terrifying eternal second, Elias's body went rigid and his heart stopped beating. The patriarch laughed, a triumphant, ugly sound. "You fool! You've killed him for me!" But then, Elias's eyes snapped open. They were not the dim, fading embers of a dying wolf. They were two blazing golden supernovas, burning with a power that was raw, ancient, and absolute. The wound in his side sealed over, the flesh knitting itself back together. A tidal wave of pure, untamed life force rolled off him, a power drawn not just from his own soul, but from hers, from the bond, from the land itself, which had now accepted them as its true anchors. He was not just healed, he was reborn. Chapter 23. Ashes and after the end came swiftly. Elias rose, no longer just an alpha but a force of nature, a creature of perfect balance between man and beast, fury and love. The completed bond was a roaring fire in his soul, a deep well of power that he now fully controlled. He met the patriarch's shocked stare, and this time, there was no contest. The fight was over in 3 moves, a blur of motion, a devastating strike, a final, absolute surrender. The patriarch fell, his power dissolving into nothing, his followers breaking and scattering like leaves in a hurricane. The war was over. They returned to the ranger's cabin, moving with a weary, triumphant grace. The reunion with Lila was a thing of quiet, tearful joy. She ran to them, a human girl once more, and for the first time, the 3 of them huddled together not as refugees, but as a pack. Whole. Complete. News travels on the wind in the shifter world. The story of their victory, of Camilla's lies and Marcus's treachery, spread faster than wildfire. The packs who had scorned him, who had called him cursed, were now shamed into silence. A delegation arrived a day later, dragging a broken, defeated Marcus with them. They brought the former elder before Elias, offering judgment as a token of their renewed fealty. It was a moment of absolute vindication. Elias looked at the man who had betrayed him, who had been willing to sacrifice a child for power, and felt nothing. No satisfaction. No desire for revenge. Only a profound weariness. "Exile," Elias said. his voice quiet but carrying the weight of a king. He will live out his days as a lone wolf with no pack to answer his call, no territory to call his own. That is his judgment. The assembled alphas bowed their heads, accepting his decree. Then they offered him the ultimate prize. "The territory is yours, Alpha Jones," one of them said. "Lead us. Restore the order the patriarch shattered." This was it, the culmination of everything. He could take it all, the power, the respect, the leadership over all the lands. He could become the king he was born to be. He looked at the eager, waiting faces of the alphas. Then he looked at Clara, who stood silently at his side, her hand in his. He looked at Lila, who was watching him with wide, trusting eyes, and he saw the future he truly wanted. It wasn't here, among these wolves and their politics. It was on a quiet ranch with a cup of coffee and a sunrise. He turned back to the alphas. "No," he said simply. "My pack is here." He squeezed Clara's hand. "The rest of you can govern yourselves." Later that day, he drove his old truck into Jasper Creek. He walked into the mayor's office, the setting sun casting a long shadow behind him. He placed his badge, his gun, and a short letter of resignation on the polished wooden desk. He was no longer Sheriff Jones, the lonely, haunted guardian of a town that feared him. He was just Elias, a man, a wolf, a mate, a father. He had walked away from power, from law, from everything he had used to define himself. He had chosen love. As he walked out onto the dusty main street, the whispers that followed him were different now. They were no longer laced with fear or suspicion. They were filled with something new, something that sounded a whole lot like awe. Chapter 24. The sunrise on the porch. A few weeks later, the sun rose over the ranch, painting the eastern sky in soft strokes of pink and gold. The air was cool and clean, smelling of dew-kissed grass and pine. From the porch swing, Clara watched the world awaken. The house was no longer a fortress, a cage. It was a home. The silence was not the tense, watchful quiet of before. It was a comfortable, easy peace, filled with the distant lowing of cattle and the gentle creak of the swing. In the yard below, Elias was with Lila. He was teaching her. She was laughing, a bright, happy sound as she practiced shifting, tumbling from a giggling girl into a clumsy, silver-furred pup and back again. Elias was patient, his voice a low, encouraging rumble. The haunted, tormented man was gone. The beast he had fought for so long was no longer his enemy. It was a part of him, and in accepting it, in allowing it to love and protect, he had finally found peace. The harsh lines on his face had softened, the rage in his eyes replaced by a deep, steady warmth that was reserved only for his family, for his pack. Clara felt the bond between them, a constant, humming presence in her soul. It was not a chain or a demand. It was a quiet strength, a gentle warmth, a silent conversation that never ended. It was the feeling of being truly, completely known. He saw her watching and came to join her, sitting beside her on the swing. He took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers, a simple, perfect gesture of belonging. He didn't need to speak. She didn't need him to. Their wolves, the wild, primal parts of their souls, were curled together at their feet, content and at rest. She leaned her head against his shoulder, breathing in his familiar scent of pine and leather and home. This was it. The quiet morning after the long, violent night. The beginning. She thought back to the question that had driven them, the fear that had nearly torn them apart. Can love and fate free you from the chains of your past? She smiled, a soft, genuine expression that finally reached her eyes. The answer was yes, but not in the way she had ever imagined. Love hadn't erased their scars. It hadn't magically healed their wounds or made them forget the pain. It had given them the strength to carry it. Freedom wasn't running from fate. It wasn't hiding from the beast within. It was choosing to stand, to fight, and to love, not in spite of the darkness, but because of it. It was choosing to build a new life, not on the ashes of the past, but on the rich, fertile ground of all they had survived. Together, they watched the sun climb higher, its golden light spilling across the land they now called home. A new day, a new life, a new beginning.